It's 1992. Inside a factory in Stuttgart, one of the most famous names in the world is quietly running out of money. Porsche, the company that built the 911, the car on every teenager's bedroom wall, is losing money on almost every vehicle it makes. Sales have collapsed by nearly half in 3 years. It takes Porsche workers around 120 hours to build a single car. A Japanese rival can build a better-made one in 30. The bank accounts are draining. The board is privately discussing whether the company should be sold, broken up, or simply allowed to die. The most prestigious sports car brand on the planet is on paper a failing regional manufacturer with a beautiful logo. And nobody outside the building knows how close to the edge it really is. To understand how Porsche got here, you have to go back to the beginning. Porsche didn't start as a car company. It started as a design office. In the 1930s, an engineer named Ferdinand Porsche took contracts to design cars for other people, including the original Volkswagen Beetle, the people's car. Porsche didn't build it. They designed it and collected a royalty on every one sold. That detail will matter enormously later. The company didn't sell a car under its own name until 1948, when Ferdinand's son, Ferry, built a small, light, rear-engine sports car called the 356. It was hand-assembled in a sawmill in Austria. From that single car grew a philosophy. Lightweight, rear-engined, obsessive, and stubbornly different from everyone else. In 1963 came the car that would define them forever, the 911. For decades, that one shape paid the bills. The problem was, by the 90s, it was almost the only thing keeping the lights on. By the early 1990s, the world had turned against Porsche. The American stock market boom of the 80s had made Porsche a status symbol, and the company had ridden that wave to record sales. Then the boom ended. A recession hit. The dollar weakened against the German mark, which meant every car shipped to America earned far less than before. Annual sales fell from over 50,000 cars to barely 14,000. And here was the deeper problem. Porsche didn't actually know how to build cars efficiently. Each one was assembled by hand, by proud craftsmen, using methods that had barely changed in decades. Parts piled up in warehouses. Defects were fixed at the very end, one, by hand. The company was bleeding cash with every beautiful, flawed car it produced. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. We dig into how the world's most impressive companies were really built, several times a week. Because what happened next is one of the strangest turnarounds in industrial history. In 1993, the board did something almost unheard of for a company this traditional. They handed control to a 41-year-old engineer named Wendelin Wiedeking. He wasn't an aristocrat. He wasn't a financier. He had started on the factory floor as a production manager, left for a parts supplier, and come back. And he had a diagnosis that horrified the old guard. Porsche, he said, didn't have a sales problem. It had a manufacturing problem. The cars were magnificent. The way they were built was a disaster. Wiedeking believed the company could be saved, but only if it threw out almost everything it thought it knew about how to make a car. He looked at the most efficient factories on Earth at the time, and they weren't in Germany. They were in Japan. So he made a decision that, to a proud Stuttgart engineer, bordered on heresy. He picked up the phone and called Toyota. What happened next became legend inside the German auto industry. Wiedeking brought in a team of Japanese efficiency consultants, veterans of the Toyota production system, and turned them loose inside the hallowed Porsche factory. The Germans were appalled. These outsiders walked the line and started pointing at everything that was wrong. Too much inventory. Too many wasted steps. Shelves were literally cut down with saws to force workers to keep less stock on hand. Parts that used to sit in warehouses for weeks now arrived just in time. The famous craftsmen, who took enormous pride in their methods, were told those methods were the problem. Some were insulted. Some quit. The proud Porsche workforce was being lectured on building cars by people who had never built a Porsche. But slowly, grudgingly, the numbers began to move. The chaos on the floor started to give way to order. And the men in suits watching the bank balance began, for the first time in years, to breathe. The results were almost hard to believe. Within a few years, the time it took to build a Porsche fell by roughly half. The number of defects on each finished car dropped dramatically. The mountains of parts inventory shrank. The point at which the company finally broke even, the number of cars it had to sell just to stop losing money, came crashing down. Porsche had gone from one of the least efficient car makers in the developed world to one that Japanese executives themselves came to study. The same craftsmen who had resisted now worked in a system that let them build better cars, faster, with less waste. But Wiedeking knew efficiency alone wouldn't save the company. You can be the most efficient factory on earth and still go under if you only sell 14,000 cars a year. Porsche didn't just need to build cars better. It needed to sell far, far more of them. And that meant building cars that, until now, Porsche had refused to build. For decades, Porsche had sold expensive cars to a small group of wealthy enthusiasts. Wiedeking's first move was to break that rule. The company needed a second model, something less expensive, that could bring in buyers who could never afford a 911. The answer was a small, open-topped roadster called the Boxster. And here came the second piece of heresy. To make the Boxster affordable, Porsche designed it to share a huge number of parts with the next generation of the 911. The front halves of the two cars were, to a remarkable degree, the same. Purists were horrified that the sacred 911 would share components with a cheaper sibling. But financially, it was brilliant. Two cars, one set of expensive tooling, one development bill. The Boxster launched in 1996 and sold beyond anyone's expectations. For the first time in years, Porsche had a genuine hit and a second source of revenue. But Wiedeking was about to make a bet that made the Boxster look timid. Imagine telling a room full of Porsche loyalists in the late 1990s that the company was going to build a heavy, tall, family-hauling sport utility vehicle. To them, it was sacrilege. Porsche made low, light, fast sports cars. An SUV was the opposite of everything the badge stood for. Wiedeking didn't care. He had seen where the money was going. Around the world, wealthy buyers were abandoning sedans and sports cars for tall, luxurious off-roaders. There was a fortune sitting there, and Porsche was ignoring it out of pride. The car would be called the Cayenne, and to share the enormous cost of developing it, Porsche partnered with the one company that knew it better than anyone, Volkswagen, the giant whose original Beetle Ferdinand Porsche had designed 70 years earlier. The two firms would build their luxury off-roaders on the same underlying platform. The enthusiasts were furious. The motoring press sharpened their knives. And then the Cayenne went on sale. The Cayenne was a phenomenon. The same buyers who swore a Porsche SUV was an abomination went out and bought it in enormous numbers. Within a couple of years, the Cayenne was outselling every sports car Porsche made, combined. And because it shared so much of its engineering with Volkswagen, each one was staggeringly profitable. Here is the number that changed everything. By the mid-2000s, Porsche was earning a profit of well over 10,000 euros on every single car it sold, a margin no mass-market automaker on earth could touch. A company that a decade earlier had been losing money on nearly every vehicle was now, per car, the most profitable car maker in the world. The turnaround was complete. Wiedeking was hailed as a genius. The man who had been mocked for calling Toyota and building an SUV had saved a national treasure. But success on this scale does something to people. It makes them believe they can't lose. And that belief was about to cost Porsche everything. By the middle of the 2000s, Porsche was generating so much cash that something strange happened to its identity. It was, on paper, a small car maker. It built far fewer cars than Toyota, Ford, or General Motors. But its profits were colossal, and its finance department had become extraordinarily aggressive. Porsche began trading complex financial instruments, options and derivatives, on a massive scale. In some years, the profit Porsche made from financial trading rivaled or even exceeded the profit it made from actually selling cars. Analysts started, half-jokingly, to describe Porsche as a hedge fund with a car company attached. At the center of this was a quiet, intense chief financial officer and a chief executive, Wiedeking, who had developed an appetite for very big, very bold moves. They had conquered manufacturing. They had conquered the SUV market. Now they set their eyes on a target so audacious it seemed almost absurd. Tiny Porsche was going to swallow the giant that had helped build the Cayenne. Porsche was going to take over Volkswagen. On the surface, the idea was insane. Volkswagen was one of the largest car makers on the planet. It sold more cars in a few weeks than Porsche sold in a year. By any normal measure, Volkswagen could have bought Porsche many times over, not the other way around. But Wiedeking and his finance chief had a plan of breathtaking cleverness. Instead of openly buying Volkswagen shares, which would send the price soaring and alert everyone, Porsche quietly accumulated control using stock options, financial contracts that let it build a hidden stake without ever showing its hand. Bit by bit, in secret, Porsche gained the right to enormous chunks of Volkswagen. The market had no idea how much of the giant the minnow already controlled. Hedge funds around the world, meanwhile, were convinced Volkswagen shares were overpriced and certain to fall, so they bet against it, borrowing Volkswagen shares and selling them, planning to buy them back cheaper later. They were walking into a trap that would become one of the most violent moments in stock market history. In October 2008, Porsche dropped the bomb. In a single statement, it revealed that through shares and options, it controlled around 74% of Volkswagen. The German state of Lower Saxony held another 20%. Do the math, and almost no Volkswagen shares were actually available to buy on the open market. But the hedge funds had borrowed and sold huge numbers of those shares, betting the price would fall. Now they all had to buy them back, and there were almost none to be found. The result was a stampede. Volkswagen's share price didn't just rise, it exploded, quadrupling in 2 days. For a few surreal hours, Volkswagen was, on paper, the most valuable company in the entire world. Worth more than Apple, more than ExxonMobil. Traders called it the infinity squeeze. The hedge funds that had bet against Volkswagen lost an estimated $30 billion. And the tiny sports car maker from Stuttgart had, through sheer financial audacity, cornered one of the biggest companies in Germany. And then, almost immediately, it all fell apart. To build that secret stake, Porsche had taken on a mountain of debt, around 10 billion euros of it. The entire scheme depended on cheap, easy credit and a calm financial world. But the year was 2008. Within weeks of Porsche's great triumph, the global financial crisis hit with full force. Credit markets froze. The cheap loans Porsche was counting on to finish the takeover vanished. Suddenly, the tiny company that had cornered a giant was drowning in debt it could not refinance. The hunter had become the prey. Porsche's bold finance chief and its celebrated chief executive watched their masterpiece collapse in real time. The takeover stalled. The debt loomed. And across the country in Wolfsburg, the leadership of Volkswagen, led by Ferdinand Piëch, a member of the Porsche family itself and no friend of Wiedeking, saw their chance. The company that had nearly been swallowed was about to turn around and devour its attacker. The end game was brutal and swift. Crippled by debt, Porsche no longer had the power to dictate terms. Volkswagen, the giant it had tried to capture, now held all the leverage. Over the next few years, the relationship was completely reversed. Instead of Porsche owning Volkswagen, Volkswagen absorbed Porsche, folding the legendary sports car maker into its empire as just one more brand among a dozen others. Wendelin Wiedeking, the engineer who had saved Porsche from bankruptcy and turned it into the most profitable car maker on earth, was forced out. He left with a severance reported to be enormous, but the company he had rebuilt was no longer independent. The man who had reached for everything ended up handing over the very thing he had spent 16 years protecting. It was a stunning fall, and the cruelest irony was that the company doing the swallowing was the one Ferdinand Porsche had helped create with a single car design 3 generations earlier. So what do you make of a story like this? On one hand, the finance gamble ended in failure. Porsche lost its independence, reaching for a prize too big to hold. But strip away the final act and look at what Wendelin Wiedeking actually built. He took a company that was 60 days from collapse, building cars by hand at a loss, and turned it into the most profitable automaker on the planet. He did it not with a marketing slogan, but by humbling himself enough to call his Japanese competitors and learn how to build. He did it by betting on a roadster the purists hated and an SUV they called Heresy, both of which paid for everything that came after. Today, Porsche is thriving, still building the 911, still one of the most desired badges in the world. The factory that almost died now runs like clockwork. The lesson isn't that ambition destroys, it's that the same nerve that rebuilds a company can also overreach it. If a story about how impossible turnarounds really happen is worth your time, subscribe. There's always another one being built.